Well, the month of March saw big gains for jobs in the leisure and hospitality sector. With 112,000 jobs added, restaurants and bars made up the biggest part of those gains, but there are still 1.5 million fewer jobs than what we saw pre-pandemic. For much more on the impact, let's bring in Andrew Rigie. He is New York City's Hospitality Alliance Executive Director. And Andrew, of course, we're talking to you because leisure and hospitality is such a big chunk of New York City's economy. It feels like people are out, tourists are returning. But what are you seeing there? How significant have those gains been?
Yeah, we want to be cautiously optimistic. New York City's restaurant industry has been devastated throughout the pandemic. We do see some job growth. Unfortunately, we're still about 20% fewer jobs in the city's restaurants and bars compared to pre-pandemic levels. And while more visitors are coming, we're still not back to the almost 70 million annual visitors that came to New York City and ate at our restaurants, visited our nightlife spots before the pandemic. So reason to be cautiously optimistic. But, the only thing that's been certain throughout the pandemic is that everything is uncertain.
Hey, I want to follow up on that because you mentioned that New York City is still pretty much in the hole compared to pre-pandemic levels. But when you look nationally, there are many other cities where that hasn't been the case. They've been able to return to pre-pandemic levels. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of different factors at play here. New York City is obviously an international city. So when we got shut down, a lot of people weren't from New York. So they went back to whatever state, whatever country it is that they are from. We rely heavily on tourism. We're not close to the 70 million annual visitors. Many of our office buildings are still at about 30% occupancy. So, restaurants located in business districts, Midtown Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, are still impacted. Neighborhoods that have more residents, similar to Lower Manhattan, like after 9/11, it became more of a mixed use residents and commercial, may be faring a little bit better, but it's tough. And I think the back and forth of opening, closing, then Omicron hit and put a lot of the growth plans on hold. So hopefully we're heading on a much better road, but we just need to be prepared and do that word pivot that everyone's been talking about nonstop.
Yeah, certainly very important over the last 2 years. Andrew, even for those restaurants that are on this path to recovery, there's a new challenge that they've had to juggle. And that is, of course, higher wages, trying to get workers through the door in a more competitive environment. We heard from President Biden a short time ago on that issue. I want you to listen to what he had to say and then get your thoughts on the other side.
Jobs and unemployment are not just another statistic. They go directly to the core of what the economy represents. The ability for hardworking Americans to live with dignity, support their families, and build a better life for their children. People are making more money. They're finding better jobs. And after decades of being mistreated and paid too little, more and more American workers have real power now to get better wages and to do what's best for themselves and their families. Some people see that as a problem. We've had this discussion in the past. I don't. I see it as long overdue.
So, Andrew, you heard the president there say that, look, higher wages, some people see that as a problem, but he thinks it's something that's long overdue, not necessarily a negative. Can you talk about the challenges this presents, the hurdle this presents, especially for a lot of these restaurants who are deep in the hole because of the last 2 years, now having to pay higher wages to actually staff up?
Yeah, we're not talking about big billion-dollar corporations here. We're talking about independent, mom and pop, everyday restaurants, very low profit margins if they're making any money at all. They've been devastated by the pandemic. And yes, of course, we want to see wages go up. It helps attract and retain workers. But there's a lot more at play here. And the failure of the federal government, frankly, to replenish the restaurant revitalization fund when 2/3 of restaurants around the country and about 65% in New York alone were shut out when that relief program was quickly exhausted, poses even more challenges. They provided relief to some restaurants, and that's incredible. That's great. Those businesses can pay some of the higher wages. But then you have businesses who have basically been struggling, small business owners that are in enormous amounts of debt right now that can't pay those same types of wages. So unfortunately, not replenishing the restaurant revitalization fund has picked winners and losers, and it makes it very difficult. And customers, frankly, are also price sensitive. There's only so much they want to pay for a burger or a bowl of pasta or whatever the dish is. So there's a sensitivity there of how much restaurants can increase their prices to help offset the increase in labor costs. But when food costs and everything else has been going up, it just makes it really, really difficult. So we can be optimistic. We should recognize wage growth is good, but we also have to be realistic that it's putting a lot of pressure on small businesses when they're still really struggling.
Yeah, certainly a balance there. And lastly, I want to ask you, obviously, beyond the fund, there are a number of other issues I'm sure you're kind of thinking about with regards to city policies. We know that open streets where restaurants can open up outside have been very much a feature that's going to be made permanent after the pandemic. But how else are you engaging with the city, especially with some talk now that maybe this new BA2 variant that's been spreading could maybe enforce some new measures back in place?
Yeah, I mean, listen, outdoor dining was extraordinarily popular and so important. It's credited with saving about 100,000 jobs. Thousands and thousands of restaurants are still open because of it. And we're turning it into a more standardized, sustainable program for the long term. But right now, as our state is negotiating our budget, they need to bring back drinks to go, alcohol to go, which was incredibly popular and also brought in a stream of revenue to restaurants that really, really needed it. So we need our elected officials to do a lot more than just say, we love restaurants, we support small business. We need ongoing, sustained policies that are really going to support them, not just as they hopefully emerge from the crisis, but to rebuild stronger, more sustainable, and smarter.
Andrew Rigie, New York City Hospitality Alliance Executive Director, thanks so much for stopping by. Have a good weekend.